Cowboy faced Apache at Moonrise, and the promise she carried forced him to choose. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to the story. Jake Donovan sat on the front porch of his cabin, his gaze lost in the distance as the sun dipped below the horizon. The dry winds of the desert swept across the land, carrying with them the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. The long days of cattle work and the nights spent alone under the stars had become routine for Jake. His ranch was his sanctuary, far from the noise and chaos of the world, where he could be alone with his thoughts. But tonight something was different. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the rugged landscape. Jake's hand rested on the worn leather of his saddle as he stared into the distance, the sound of his horse's hooves echoing softly in the quiet night. That's when he saw her. Ayanna. She stood at the edge of his property, a silhouette against the rising moon, her dark hair blowing in the wind. Jake had heard stories of the Apache, but never had he imagined meeting one face to face, especially not like this. Ayanna didn't move. She stood still, watching him as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Her figure was strong, graceful, yet there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of a past filled with pain and survival. Jake stood up, his instincts telling him to be cautious, but there was something in the way she held herself that made him hesitate. She wasn't here to fight, she wasn't here to cause trouble. She was here for something else, something deeper. As Jake took a step toward her, the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ayanna spoke then, her voice carrying on the night air like a soft whisper, but with an authority that sent a chill down Jake's spine. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know you." Jake's heart skipped a beat. She was right, he didn't know her. But something in her words, something in the way she said them, struck a chord within him. "What do you want?" Jake asked, his voice steadied but laced with uncertainty. Ayanna didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a step forward, her gaze never leaving his. The moonlight caught the edge of a silver pendant hanging from her neck, a pendant that shimmered with a history of its own. "I need your help," she said, her voice low but firm. "I carry a promise that was made long ago, and now it's time for you to choose." Jake's brow furrowed as he looked at her. A promise? What kind of promise? He didn't know, but the weight of her words settled heavily on his chest. "A promise?" he repeated, his voice trailing off. Ayanna nodded, the silver pendant gleaming in the moonlight. "My people have been through too much," she said. "And now, I am the one who must carry our future. But to do that, I need someone who understands what it means to fight for survival. Someone who can see past the past, and look toward a future we can build together." Jake stood frozen. The idea of helping her, of stepping into the world of the Apache, was foreign to him. But something about Ayanna, about the promise she carried, made him wonder if this was the moment he had been waiting for his whole life. The wind picked up, swirling around them as the moon climbed higher in the sky. Jake could feel the weight of her gaze, the intensity of her words, and the choice that lay ahead. A choice he wasn't sure he was ready to make. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized there was no turning back now. He had already made his decision. But what would that decision cost him? The silence between them stretched, broken only by the soft rustle of the wind through the sagebrush. Jake couldn't remember the last time he had been so close to someone who carried so much weight in their eyes. Ayanna stood there, still as a statue, waiting for him to make a decision. The choice felt too heavy to bear, too big for him to fully comprehend. But the more he looked at her, the more he realized there was no turning back. The promise she spoke of wasn't just hers, it was something that could change everything. He could feel it in his bones, the gravity of the moment. "What do you need me to do?" Jake finally asked, his voice low, steady, but filled with uncertainty. Ayanna's gaze softened just a little, as if she had been waiting for that question. You have to trust me, she said simply, taking a step closer, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had already sacrificed. I need you to take me to the canyon where we can meet my people. There is something there that could change everything for both of us. But we have to go now. Jake's heart beat faster as he processed her words. The canyon. Her people. He had heard stories, tales of Apache warriors, of a way of life he had never understood, a life that had been so far removed from his own. Yet here she was, standing before him, asking for his help. The wind picked up again, swirling around them, making the moment feel even more surreal. He could have turned her away. He could have ignored the pull in his chest, the strange, undeniable connection he felt toward her. But he didn't. All right, Jake said after a long pause, his words feeling final. I'll help you. But I need to know more. What is this thing you're after? And why me? Ayana's eyes flashed with something like recognition, but she remained silent for a moment. She seemed to be gathering her thoughts, choosing her words carefully. It's a symbol, she said at last. A relic that was passed down through generations in my tribe. It's more than just a piece of metal, it's a key to our future. But it's been hidden away for a long time, lost in the canyon. My people need it, and I need you to help me find it. Jake nodded slowly, trying to make sense of her words. The relic. A key to her people's future. It all sounded like something out of a story, not real life. But then again, nothing about Ayana had seemed ordinary since the moment she had appeared in his life. We leave at first light, Jake said, a sense of determination building inside him. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was the only path forward. Ayana gave a small nod of approval, her lips curling into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you, she said softly. Jake turned toward the barn, readying his horse for the journey ahead. The night had fallen fully now, the moon high in the sky, its light casting long shadows over the land. As he saddled up, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would change everything, not just for him, but for both of them. When he turned back toward Ayana, she was already watching him, her expression unreadable. He wondered what she was thinking, but he didn't ask. They didn't have time for questions anymore. As the wind howled around them, they both knew the time for hesitation was over. The canyon awaited, and so did the promise that could either save or destroy them both. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jake and Ayana prepared for their journey. The land was still and quiet, as though holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Jake adjusted his saddle and glanced back at the cabin, the only home he had ever known. The thought of leaving it behind, even temporarily, made him uneasy. But there was something in Ayana's eyes that made him feel like this was the right path, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Ayana stood silently by the horses, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, her expression unreadable. The silver pendant around her neck glinted in the early morning light, and Jake couldn't help but wonder about the weight it carried for her. He had never been one to question the choices of others, but something about this woman, about this journey, felt different. As they set off, the road ahead was rough, winding through the rugged terrain of the desert. The horses' hooves kicked up dust, and the wind whispered through the scrub brush, carrying with it the scent of the earth. It wasn't long before Jake noticed that Ayana moved with purpose, her every step sure and confident, as though she had walked this path many times before. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. They both had their thoughts to themselves, and the journey felt like a moment of introspection. Hours passed, and the landscape began to shift. The flat desert plains gave way to rocky hills and narrow canyons, and the air grew cooler as they climbed higher. The sounds of nature filled the air, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of an eagle. As they reached the top of a hill, Ayana stopped suddenly, her hand resting lightly on her horse's reins. Jake pulled his horse up beside hers, glancing over at her. She was looking out at the distant canyon, her gaze far away, as though lost in thought. "We're close," Ayana said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, unsure of what exactly they were about to find, but knowing that this moment felt important. Ayana turned to him, her expression softening. "I've waited a long time for this," she said. Jake could hear the weight of those words, the years of waiting and longing that had brought her here, to this moment, to this place. "What exactly are we looking for?" Jake asked, his curiosity finally getting the better of him. Ayana's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the walls between them seemed to crumble. "It's not just about the relic," she said. "It's about what it represents. It's about a future that has been denied to my people for too long." Jake could see the passion in her eyes, the fire that burned beneath her calm exterior. It was a fire that matched his own, the desire for something more, something better. They continued on, the canyon growing closer with each step, until the rocky walls loomed above them, casting long shadows across the path. As they descended into the canyon, the air grew cooler, and the sounds of the outside world seemed to fade away. The only sound was the steady rhythm of their horses' hooves against the earth, the only sight the towering cliffs that surrounded them. Jake felt a sense of awe wash over him as they rode deeper into the canyon, the sheer magnitude of the place overwhelming. He had never seen anything like it before, and he couldn't help but feel that they were heading towards something monumental, something that would change everything. Ayana stopped her horse at the base of a large rock formation, dismounting gracefully and tying her horse to a nearby tree. Jake followed her lead, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. She turned to him, her eyes serious now, as though she was preparing him for something. "This is where it begins," she said quietly. "This is where the promise will be fulfilled." Jake didn't know what that meant, but he trusted her. He followed her as she led him to a small, hidden opening in the rocks, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Ayana paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. "This is the place," she said. "Are you ready?" Jake nodded, though his heart was racing. He didn't know what they were about to find, but he felt ready. Ready to face whatever lay ahead, whatever the future held for them both. As Ayana led Jake through the narrow passageway, the air grew thicker, carrying the earthy scent of moss and rock. The walls of the canyon seemed to close in around them, casting long shadows in the fading light. Jake followed her closely, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife, his senses heightened, ready for anything. Ayana's movements were fluid, sure, as though she had done this 1,000 times before. She didn't speak, but there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, a calmness that put Jake at ease despite the uncertainty swirling in his mind. They came to a stop before a small, hidden alcove, its entrance barely visible unless one knew where to look. Ayana paused for a moment, her hand hovering over the entrance as if she were sensing something. Jake watched her closely, trying to make sense of it all. What was she expecting to find here? What was so important about this place? Ayana finally turned to him, her face serious. "This is it," she said softly. "This is where the relic is hidden." Jake's heart raced, his mind grappling with the enormity of the moment. The relic, the symbol of her people's future. It was hard to grasp how much weight was attached to such a simple object, but Ayana's eyes held the answer. There was more at stake here than he had realized. She stepped into the alcove, motioning for him to follow. The space was small, but there was an unmistakable energy in the air, a hum that Jake could feel deep in his chest. He had no idea what it was, but it made his skin prick with anticipation. Ayana moved toward the back of the alcove, where a large stone slab rested against the wall. She placed her hand on it, running her fingers across the surface, as though she were searching for something. Jake watched in silence, his breath steady but his thoughts racing. This was no ordinary rock. There was something ancient about it, something that spoke of time and history far beyond his own understanding. With a soft grunt, Ayana pushed the stone aside, revealing a small, hidden compartment beneath it. She reached into the darkness and withdrew a leather-bound box, worn and weathered by time. The box was small, but Jake could feel the weight of it, both in his chest and in the air around them. Ayana held it carefully, as though it were the most precious thing in the world. She turned to Jake, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the fading daylight. "This is it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is the key to our future." Jake took a step forward, his curiosity piqued. "What's inside?" he asked. Ayana's eyes softened as she opened the box, revealing a small, intricately carved pendant. The silver of the pendant gleamed in the light, and Jake could feel its significance without understanding its true meaning. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something more to it. Something ancient, something powerful. Ayana held the pendant in her hand, her fingers brushing over the carvings as though she were communing with it. "This pendant," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "was made by my ancestors. It holds the history of my people, the promise of who we are and who we will become. Without it, we are lost. But with it, we can rebuild." Jake looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had never understood the depth of the struggles faced by people like Ayana. To him, the world had always been simple, clear lines between right and wrong, black and white. But now, as he stood beside her, holding the future of her people in his hands, he realized how little he truly knew. Ayana closed the box gently, her fingers lingering on the pendant for a moment longer. "We have to protect it," she said, her voice low. "We have to take it to the council, to the people who can help us rebuild. Only then can we fulfill the promise that was made so long ago." Jake nodded, though he still wasn't fully sure what that promise meant or how it would change anything. But he had come this far, and there was no turning back now. He looked at Ayana, the determination in her eyes matching his own. Together they would carry this burden, whatever it meant for their future. As they left the alcove and the stone slabs slid back into place, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. They had only just begun. And whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer just a cowboy in the Wild West. He was now part of something much bigger than himself. The air grew colder as Jake and Ayana continued their journey through the canyon. The weight of the pendant still hung heavy in Jake's chest, and with each step, the responsibility he felt grew more intense. It was as if the land itself was watching them, listening for the choice they would make. The narrow passage between the towering rock walls felt like a test, the world closing in around them. As they traveled deeper into the canyon, the sound of their horses' hooves was the only thing that broke the silence. The usual bustle of life, the sounds of nature, seemed to fade into the background. It was as though everything was waiting. Ayana remained in front, her pace steady, her back straight. She didn't speak much, but Jake could feel the tension in the air around her, the weight of the task at hand pressing down on her shoulders. He wanted to ask more questions, to understand what exactly she was hoping to achieve, but somehow, it didn't feel like the right moment. They passed through winding paths and jagged rocks, the canyon walls narrowing even more as they moved forward. The landscape had shifted dramatically since the early morning, from the open plains to the tight, hidden corridors of the canyon. There was no turning back now. Ayana stopped abruptly, her horse's reins tight in her grip. Jake pulled his horse up beside hers, sensing the change in her. She looked ahead, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. Jake followed her gaze but saw nothing but rock and shadow. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ayana didn't answer. Right away. She seemed to be listening to something, something only she could hear. After a moment, she spoke. "They're here," she said quietly. Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he asked. Ayana turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "The council," she said, her voice steady. "We've arrived." Jake looked around, but all he saw were the towering cliffs that surrounded them. The canyon felt empty, still, almost eerie. But Ayana's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The council. The people who would help them fulfill the promise she had carried all this way. He didn't fully understand what that meant, but he was about to find out. Ayana turned her horse towards a narrow path between the cliffs, the way forward hidden in the shadows. "Follow me," she said, her voice strong, determined. Jake followed, his thoughts racing. As they moved forward, the canyon walls seemed to close in even more, the space growing tighter. The air felt thick with anticipation, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. They came to a small clearing, the path opening up to reveal a group of figures standing in the shadows. At first, Jake could barely make out their shapes, their forms blending into the rocks. But as they drew closer, he saw them clearly, 4 figures, all dressed in traditional Apache attire. They stood silently, their faces calm, their eyes unreadable. Ayana dismounted first, her movements fluid and graceful. She walked towards the group without hesitation, her head held high. Jake followed, his heart beating faster now. The group parted as Ayana approached, and one of the figures stepped forward. It was an older man, his long gray hair tied back in a braid. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, filled with wisdom. Ayana stopped in front of him, bowing her head slightly in respect. The man regarded her for a moment before speaking. "You have returned," he said, his voice deep and commanding. Ayana nodded. "I have," she replied simply. The man's gaze shifted to Jake, and for the first time, Ayana spoke directly to him. "This is Jake Donovan," she said. "He has helped me. He is part of this now." The man nodded, his expression softening ever so slightly. "We welcome him," he said. "The time has come." Jake felt a strange sense of belonging in that moment, though he didn't fully understand what was happening. The council, the future of Ayana's people, was all around him. And in that moment, he knew that whatever happened next would forever change his life, and the life of the woman who had brought him here. The man turned, gesturing for them to follow. As they walked deeper into the canyon, Jake felt the weight of his choice settle fully on his shoulders. He had stepped into something far larger than himself, something that held the power to change everything. But he wasn't turning back now. He was part of it, for better or for worse. As they moved deeper into the canyon, the world around Jake seemed to shift. The air grew thicker, the shadows deeper, and the echoes of the canyon walls whispered secrets that had been hidden for generations. The council, the people Ayana had spoken of, were gathered in a small, hidden enclave within the canyon, their presence quiet but undeniably powerful. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of anticipation, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. Jake followed Ayana and the council leader into the heart of the gathering. The space was surrounded by towering rock formations, their jagged edges softened by the fading light. There, in the center, sat a circle of figures, their faces lined with age and experience, their eyes focused on the two of them. Ayana walked ahead, her head held high, as the council members turned their gaze upon her. Jake felt out of place, like an outsider in a world he couldn't fully understand. Yet, as Ayana stepped forward, he couldn't help but feel the weight of her purpose, the quiet strength that radiated from her. The council leader spoke first, his voice deep and steady. "You have returned," he said, his words not just a statement but a recognition of the journey Ayana had undertaken. "And you bring with you the promise of your people's future." Ayana nodded, her eyes never leaving the council leaders. "I do," she replied simply. "But I cannot do this alone." The leader's gaze shifted to Jake, and for the first time, Ayana spoke directly to him. "This is Jake Donovan," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a bond that had formed between them over the course of their journey. "He has helped me. He is a part of this now." Jake felt the eyes of the council turn toward him, their silent scrutiny weighing on him. He wasn't sure what he had expected from this moment, but it wasn't this feeling of being thrust into something much bigger than himself. The leader studied him for a moment, his eyes sharp and assessing. "You have come far, Jake Donovan," he said, his voice like gravel. "But you must understand the gravity of what you are about to be a part of. This is not just a promise, it is the future of an entire people." Jake swallowed, his throat dry. He didn't fully understand the magnitude of what Ayana had brought him into, but he could feel it. He could feel the weight of her people's history, their struggles, their hopes for the future. "I'm ready," Jake said, though his words felt heavy in his mouth. "I'll do whatever it takes." The council leader nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "We shall see," he said. The future cannot be shaped by words alone. It must be earned through actions. Jake nodded, his resolve solidifying. He had already made his choice when he had agreed to come this far, but now it felt even more real. There was no turning back. As the council leader stepped back, one of the other figures in the circle, a woman with long black hair and sharp features, stood up. She regarded Jake with a mixture of curiosity and challenge. "You are the outsider," she said, her voice steady and clear. "What makes you worthy of our trust? What makes you worthy of standing with us?" Jake felt his pulse quicken. He had never been good with words, never been the type to stand before a group of strangers and defend his worth. But he knew one thing for sure: he would stand by Ayana, no matter what. He met the woman's gaze, his eyes unwavering. "I don't know if I'm worthy," he said, his voice rough but honest. "But I know that I'm here. And I'm here to help." The woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes sharp, weighing his words. Finally, she nodded. "We shall see," she said. "But be warned, this is not a path for the faint of heart." Ayana stepped forward then, standing beside Jake. Her presence was like a shield, a quiet strength that Jake couldn't help but feel drawn to. She turned to the council, her voice calm but resolute. "I have come to fulfill the promise I made. And I have brought with me the future of our people." The council leader nodded again, his face unreadable. "Then let us see what the future holds," he said. And with those words, Jake knew that whatever lay ahead, it would be more than just a journey. It would be a fight, for Ayana, for her people, and for a future that had been promised long ago. The air was thick with anticipation as the council's leader motioned for Jake and Ayana to step forward. The small gathering of figures, now silent, watched them closely. Jake could feel their eyes on him, each one evaluating, judging, measuring the worth of his presence here. He had never been part of something so significant, so much larger than his own world, but the weight of it settled on his shoulders. It was as though the land itself had drawn a line in the sand, and now it was up to him to cross it. Ayana's presence beside him was steadying. He could sense the strength that radiated from her, the quiet confidence that she had carried with her all this way. She had chosen him, and despite all the doubts swirling in his mind, he knew there was no turning back. "You have come to us for a reason," the council leader said, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. "But you are not alone in this. There are many who must be convinced, many who must be brought together." Ayana nodded, her expression resolute. "I know," she replied. "But this is the moment. The moment when the promise becomes real." The leader regarded her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and gestured for the others to follow. "The path ahead will not be easy," he said, his voice low but full of gravity. "But it is a path that must be walked together." Jake's heart raced. He wasn't sure what was expected of him, but he knew that whatever it was, it would challenge him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The journey they had embarked on was only just beginning, and the weight of Ayana's promise felt heavier with every step they took. As they moved deeper into the canyon, the walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching longer as the sun sank lower in the sky. The air grew cooler, the silence more pronounced, and Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of history pressing down on them. This was a place where decisions had been made, where futures had been shaped, and now they were part of that legacy. They arrived at a small clearing, the rocks around them jagged and weathered by time. In the center stood an ancient stone, its surface covered in markings that seemed to pulse with energy. Ayana stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the stone as she knelt before it. Jake followed, his heart pounding as he watched her, uncertain of what to do next. The council members formed a circle around them, their faces solemn as they awaited the next step. Ayana reached out, her fingers brushing over the markings on the stone, and for a moment, Jake could have sworn the air shimmered around them. It was as though the stone itself was alive, reacting to her touch. "This is where it begins," Ayana whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake didn't know what she meant, but he could feel the significance of the moment. This stone, this place, was where their journey would either be fulfilled or fail. It was as if everything had led to this point, and now there was no turning back. As Ayana spoke again, her voice stronger this time, Jake felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. "This stone holds the power of our ancestors," she said. "It is the key to everything we have lost and everything we must reclaim." The council leader stepped forward then, his expression unreadable. "You understand what this means?" he asked Jake. Jake nodded, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. "I do," he said, though the words felt strange on his tongue. He wasn't sure if he fully understood, but he knew that this was where the future would be decided. The leader studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then let us begin." The group gathered closer, their hands resting on the stone as Ayana led them in a silent prayer. Jake watched her, the quiet determination in her every movement. He had never seen her like this before, calm, focused, as though she had become one with the land itself. It was a side of her that he hadn't fully understood until now, and it made him realize just how much she had sacrificed to get to this point. As the prayer ended, the leader turned to Jake. "You are part of this now," he said. "You are part of the future." Jake felt the weight of his words, and for the first time since he had agreed to help Ayana, he truly understood what he had gotten himself into. This was bigger than anything he had ever known, and whatever the future held, it was up to him and Ayana to shape it. They were no longer strangers to each other, no longer two people thrown together by chance. They were a team, bound by a promise, and together, they would face whatever came next. The morning air was crisp as Jake and Ayana made their way out of the canyon, the weight of the council's words still heavy in the silence between them. The stone they had touched seemed to hum with an energy that neither of them could fully explain, and as they rode side by side, Jake couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. The land felt different now, more alive, as if it were watching them, waiting for what they would do next. The journey ahead was unclear, but the decision they had made felt final. Jake looked over at Ayana, her face still set in a quiet determination, though there was something softer in her gaze now. The urgency was still there, but there was a sense of peace, a quiet understanding between them. They rode in silence for a while, the sound of their horses' hooves echoing against the canyon walls as they began their journey back to the village. The path was rocky and treacherous, but neither of them hesitated. It was as if the promise had already begun to work its magic, pushing them forward despite the unknown challenges ahead. "Do you think they believe in us?" Jake asked after a while, his voice low. Ayana turned to him, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before she spoke. "They have no choice but to believe," she said softly. "We all carry the same hope. But whether they choose to follow it, that's up to them." Jake nodded, processing her words. He had never thought of it that way before, the idea of hope being something that could be shared, but never fully controlled. "And you?" he asked. "Do you think it's enough?" Ayana looked ahead, her gaze focused on the road ahead. "I have to," she said simply. "It's all I have." Jake could hear the truth in her voice, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future hanging in the air between them. There was no going back, no turning away from the promise that had been made so long ago. He realized then that this wasn't just her fight. It was theirs. He had become part of this story, whether he was ready for it or not. As they neared the village, the landscape began to change. The canyon opened up, and the land flattened out, the dense brush and rocky terrain giving way to open fields. The village was in sight now, the simple huts and structures dotting the horizon like small, silent witnesses to the history that had unfolded here. Ayana's shoulders seemed to relax, her posture easing slightly as they neared the familiar territory. She had returned. But this time, it wasn't just her alone. It was the beginning of something new, something that had the potential to change everything. They arrived at the edge of the village just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The last light of the day cast long shadows across the ground, and the village came alive with the sounds of evening preparation. Ayana dismounted, her movements graceful as she tethered her horse. Jake followed suit, feeling a strange mixture of nerves and resolve settle in his stomach. This was it. The moment they had been working toward. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew that they couldn't stop now. Ayana turned to him, her expression unreadable. You should stay here tonight, she said. Rest. Tomorrow, we go to the council. Jake nodded, though the thought of resting seemed impossible. There was too much at stake, too many unknowns to process. But he knew that there was no point in rushing things. They had already come so far. The village was quiet, the sounds of the night settling in as the stars began to shine overhead. Jake found a place to sit near the fire, the warmth of the flames a comfort against the cool night air. Ayana sat beside him, her eyes distant as she watched the flames dance. The silence between them was comfortable, though there was a heaviness to it. They both knew what was coming, what they would have to face together. And for the first time, Jake felt that he wasn't just following Ayana. He was part of something bigger, something that could change the course of history. And somehow, that felt right. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Jake found himself drifting into a quiet sleep, the weight of the journey ahead still heavy in his mind, but also filled with the hope that Ayana had spoken of. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the next chapter. And he was ready to face it, whatever it held. The morning was still and quiet as the first light of dawn began to seep into the village. Jake awoke to the sound of soft murmurs around the fire, the warmth of the embers providing a stark contrast to the coolness of the night. Ayana was already awake, standing by the fire, her figure outlined against the rising sun. She looked deep in thought, her expression unreadable as she stared into the flames. Jake rose slowly, stretching his arms as he approached her. Are you ready? He asked quietly. Ayana turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a calmness that was almost unnerving. We have no choice but to be, she replied. Her voice was steady, but there was a weight behind her words. Jake nodded, though his own nerves were still raw. He had no idea what they would face when they met with the council today. The promise, the relic, the future, it all hung in the balance. As they walked through the village, the people around them went about their daily routines, but there was a sense of quiet expectation in the air. They knew something significant was about to happen. Jake felt the eyes of the villagers on him, their silent judgment weighing on him as he followed Ayana through the narrow streets. He had never felt so out of place, yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt connected to this place, to Ayana, in a way that was hard to deny. The journey had brought him here, but it was more than that. He was part of something bigger now. Ayana led him to a large gathering space at the center of the village, where a group of elders were waiting. They sat in a circle, their faces serious, their eyes scanning the two of them as they approached. The tension in the air was palpable. Jake stood beside Ayana, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment, the importance of what they were about to do. Ayana stepped forward first, her head held high as she addressed the council. I have returned, she said, her voice calm but firm. And I bring with me the future of my people. The council leader, an older man with sharp features and a commanding presence, looked up at her. You have returned indeed, he said. But you have brought a stranger with you. What is his place in this? Ayana turned to Jake, her gaze softening ever so slightly. He is part of this now, she said, her voice steady. He has helped me, and he has earned his place by my side. The council leader studied Jake for a long moment, his eyes calculating. So be it, he said finally. But know this, our path is not one of ease. If you are to stand with us, you must prove your worth. The future of our people rests on your shoulders as much as hers. Jake felt the weight of the leader's words settle deep within him. He wasn't sure how he was supposed to prove himself, but he knew he had to try. The elders remained silent, watching him closely. Ayana stepped forward then, standing tall as she addressed them. I carry the promise of my ancestors, she said. And with this promise, we can rebuild what was lost. But we cannot do it alone. The council leader nodded slowly, his expression softening just a fraction. We will listen to you, he said. But the decision is not ours alone to make. There are others who must be convinced, others who must stand with you. Ayana's gaze never wavered as she met his eyes. Then we will convince them, she said simply. The council leader stood, signaling that the gathering was over. You have 1 day, he said. Tomorrow, we will decide whether or not we can move forward. With that, the council dispersed, leaving Jake and Ayana alone in the center of the village. Jake turned to her, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. What now? He asked. Ayana looked at him, her expression unreadable. Now we wait, she said softly. And we hope. The weight of her words hung in the air as they walked away, the future uncertain but the resolve in their hearts unwavering. Whatever happened next, they would face it together.